The moment I saw Michael's smirk as he slid the denial letter across his desk, something inside me snapped. Company policy, Sarah. Our insurance doesn't cover elective procedures. I'm really sorry. The rehearsed sympathy in his voice made my stomach turn. The throbbing pain in my shoulder, the one I couldn't lift above chest height anymore, seemed to intensify, as if to remind me there was nothing elective about the surgery I desperately needed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat frozen in that ergonomic chair I'd lobbied for our entire department to get last year. The same chair Michael had praised me for finding such a cost-effective solution for. Now here he was, denying the medical care that would let me keep doing my job without constant pain. The carefully highlighted policy document beside the letter looked pristine, like it had been prepared for this exact moment. But Dr. Williams said if I don't get this surgery soon, the damage could become permanent, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This isn't cosmetic, Michael. You've seen me struggling for months. He leaned back in his chair, the premium model, of course, and sighed. The insurance committee reviewed your case, Sarah. If you want to appeal, you're welcome to. But these decisions rarely get overturned. Maybe try physical therapy first? Behind him, through the glass wall of his office, I could see David glance over with concern. He knew why I was here. He'd been covering for me on the projects requiring heavy computer work that sent shooting pain down my arm. 20 feet beyond Michael's sympathetic facade, my team was watching, wondering if I'd finally get the help I needed. I reached for the letter with my good arm, careful not to wince despite the pain. Thanks for your time, I managed, rising, to leave. Sarah? Michael called as I reached for the door. This won't affect your performance review next month, but you know the company has expectations about productivity. That's when I knew. This wasn't about insurance policies or elective procedures. This was about the promotion I was up for, the one Michael's nephew had suddenly expressed interest in. This was about making me quit before I could claim it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and walked out with my head high. I didn't break until I reached the bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and pressed my forehead against the cool metal door. My shoulder screamed in protest at even this slight pressure. 3 years I'd given to Horizon Technologies. 3 years of overtime, of brilliant solutions, of building a reputation as the problem solver. And now this. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from David. How bad? I typed back with my left hand, awkwardly, denied, elective procedure. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then, my office, I have an idea. What David had wasn't just an idea. It was something far more valuable. A small black notebook which he pressed into my hand when I entered his cramped office in the back corner of the floor. Start documenting, he whispered, closing the door. Everything. Dates, times, exact wording, every email, every conversation, every time he references your injury or performance. Trust me on this. I stared at the notebook. David, I can't sue. I need this job. I need the health insurance, even if it won't cover my surgery. He shook his head. My sister went through something similar at her company. It's not just about the denial. It's the pattern. The Americans with Disabilities Act, FMLA, there are protections, but you need documentation. The notebook felt heavy in my hand, like it contained possibilities I wasn't ready to consider. But I slipped it into my bag anyway. Also, David added, start sending emails to recap your verbal conversations, just to confirm our discussion today about my insurance claim being denied due to. Make him respond in writing. I nodded. Slowly, the kernel of resolve hardening in my chest. I don't know if I can fight this, David. You don't have to decide that now, he said, just start taking notes. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table in my apartment, the one with the view of the brick wall of the neighboring building, and opened the notebook. My handwriting was shaky. The pain had been getting worse, but I started on the first page. April 15th, 2:15 p.m. Meeting with Michael Thompson, re-surgery insurance claim. Claim denied as elective procedure, despite doctor's letter stating medical necessity. Michael suggested it could impact my performance review if productivity falls. Witnesses. None in room. David Chen saw me exit meeting visibly upset. It felt small, putting those words on paper. But it was something. A record. That what happened to me mattered, even if only to me. I hadn't always been in pain. 6 months ago, I'd been the picture of health. The kind of person who hiked Mount Rainier on weekends and led the company softball team to a championship against our corporate rivals. I'd moved to Seattle 5 years ago, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a computer science degree, determined to make my mark in the tech world. Horizon Technologies hadn't been my dream company. They weren't exactly Google or Microsoft, but they were solid, growing, and most importantly, they'd given me a chance when the bigger names had passed. I started as a software developer, but quickly found my niche solving problems between teams, translating technical jargon for the business side and business needs for the developers. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted to project coordinator. And just before my injury, Michael had hinted strongly that the team lead position would be mine when Jerome retired in June. "You're our future, Sarah," he'd said during my last review, his smile wide and seemingly genuine. "You bridge worlds here. We need that." My apartment wasn't much. A 1-bedroom in Capitol Hill with a kitchen barely big enough to turn around. But I'd made it mine. Photographs from hikes lined the walls, plants crowded every windowsill, and my prized possession, a real mid-century modern coffee table I'd found at a thrift store, sat in the center of my small living room. It wasn't luxury, but it was independence, something I'd fought hard for after growing up in a household where money was always tight and dreams were seen as impractical. The injury happened on a company retreat, ironically enough. Team building. Exercises at a ropes course north of the city. I'd been paired with Jerome, helping him across a suspended bridge when his weight shifted unexpectedly. The sudden pull had wrenched my shoulder in a way that made stars explode behind my eyelids. I'd finished the course, though, gritting my teeth through the pain because I didn't want to make a scene. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Michael had even praised my trooper attitude in front of everyone at dinner that night. I should have gone to the doctor immediately, but we had a product launch coming up. I popped ibuprofen, used heating pads, and pushed through. By the time I finally got an MRI 6 weeks later, the damage was extensive. A torn rotator cuff, frayed tendons, and inflammation that had become chronic. Dr. Williams hadn't minced words. "You need surgery, and soon, or you risk permanent loss of mobility." I'd filed the insurance claim the next day, confident it would be approved. The injury had happened at a company event, was well documented by the urgent care center I'd eventually visited, and had a clear treatment path. I'd even made a spreadsheet showing how the cost of surgery now would be less than the potential disability accommodations if the injury worsened. That confidence seemed laughable now as I sat at my kitchen table, shoulder throbbing despite the ice pack I'd balanced on it, staring at the first entry in my documentation notebook. My phone buzzed again. David checking in. "You okay?" His text read. I wasn't. The pain was physical, yes, but there was something else too. A hollowness that came from realizing how disposable I was to a company I'd given so much to. How quickly Michael's mentor-like encouragement had transformed into thinly veiled threats once I became inconvenient. "Working on it," I texted back, unwilling to burden David with my darker thoughts. I took a deep breath and continued writing. In the notebook, detailing every interaction I could remember over the past months. The time Michael had commented on how I winced during a presentation. The email thread where he'd questioned if I could handle the team retreat planning in my condition. The meeting where he'd asked, with witnesses present, if I needed to take some time until I was back to 100%. Patterns emerged on the page in black and white. What had felt like isolated incidents now formed a clear narrative of subtle pressure, of being gradually nudged toward the margins. How had I not seen it? The next morning, I arrived at work early, notebook tucked safely in my bag. I'd spent hours researching employment law, FMLA requirements, and ADA protections until my eyes burned from the screen glare. Knowledge felt like armor, thin, but better than nothing. Lisa from HR was already at her desk, scrolling through emails with a coffee in hand. I'd always liked Lisa. She had pictures of rescue dogs all over her cubicle and ran the company's holiday charity, Drive. More importantly, she'd been at Horizon since before Michael, and didn't seem particularly impressed by his rapid rise to management. "Morning, Lisa. Do you have a minute?" She looked up, smile fading when she saw my expression. "Sure, Sarah. Everything okay?" I closed her office door behind me, suddenly nervous. "I need to know something off the record. Has anyone else had problems with insurance claims for medical procedures?" Lisa's eyes darted to the door, then back to me. She lowered her voice. "This is about your surgery?" I nodded. She sighed, reaching for a pad of sticky notes. She wrote something, then passed it to me. Not the first time. Talk outside company property. My heart raced as I read it, then nodded and crumpled the note into my pocket. "Thanks for the birthday card recommendation," I said at normal volume. "My mom will love it." Lisa smiled, the concern still evident in her eyes. "Anytime. The shop on Pike has the best selection." That evening, I met Lisa at the Daily Grind, a coffee shop far enough from the office to be safe from accidental run-ins with coworkers. She was already at a corner table when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs waiting. "I ordered you chai," she said as I sat down. "I remember you mentioned coffee makes your shoulder pain worse." The small act of kindness nearly undid me. "Thanks," I managed, wrapping my good hand around the warm mug. Lisa leaned forward. "I can't tell you much, Sarah. I could lose my job. But what I can say is that 3 insurance claims for major medical procedures have been denied in the past year, all classified as elective, despite doctor recommendations. All for people in departments Michael oversees." My mouth went dry. "Why would he—" "Bonuses," Lisa interrupted. "Department heads get quarterly bonuses for keeping insurance claims below a certain threshold. It was implemented last year as a cost-saving initiative. Most managers just encourage wellness programs, ergonomic workstations, that sort of thing. But Michael, he actively prevents people from getting care," I finished. Lisa nodded grimly. "The others either paid out of pocket or left the company. Nobody fought it. And HR just allows this?" Her expression hardened slightly. "I've filed reports. They disappear. Michael has friends on the executive floor." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and slid a business card across the table. "This is an employment attorney a friend used. Just if you need it." I stared at the embossed text, Baxter and Reed Law Offices. "I don't know if I can do this, Lisa. I need this job." "I know," she said softly. "But Sarah, what happens when the next person needs surgery? Or when your condition gets worse? Someone has to break the pattern." I slipped the card into my notebook, next to my growing list of documented incidents. "Why are you helping me? You're risking a lot." Lisa's eyes drifted to her left hand, where I noticed a faint tan line where a ring had once been. "My ex-husband had a workplace injury." His manager pulled something similar, denied accommodations, pushed him to work through pain. By the time I convinced him to fight back, the damage was permanent. He became dependent on pain medications, and eventually. She shook her head. No one should have to choose between their health and their livelihood. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry. Just promise me you'll think about it, she said. And whatever you decide, keep documenting everything. It matters. That night I couldn't sleep. Pain was part of it. My shoulder felt like it was being stabbed with hot needles. But more than that, my mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if I fought and lost? What if I didn't fight at all? I got up and padded to the kitchen, where my notebook lay open on the table. Next to it, I placed the letter from Dr. Williams detailing the necessity of the surgery, the denial letter from the insurance committee, and the business card from the attorney. Whatever I decided, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again be blindsided by Michael's false sympathy or calculated manipulations. Every interaction, every email, every meeting would be meticulously documented. The notebook David had given me was nearly a quarter full already, and I'd only been at it for 2 days. If nothing else, I would have a record of the truth. And sometimes, that's where justice begins. The next week passed in a blur of pain and purpose. Each morning, I arrived at work with my notebook hidden in my bag, ready to record the day's events. Each night, I transcribed my notes into a password-protected document on my personal laptop, building a chronology that even I found shocking when viewed as a whole. Michael was careful. I had to give him that. He never explicitly threatened my job or acknowledged denying my claim for anything but policy reasons. Instead, it was death by 1,000 cuts, moving me off high-visibility projects, excluding me from strategic meetings, making subtle comments about team reliability when I asked for accommodations. On Thursday, he stopped by my desk, all smiles and casual posture. "Hey, Sarah, how's the shoulder today?" "About the same," I replied, noting the conversation start time in my notebook as soon as he walked away. "Look, I've been thinking about your situation," he continued, perching on the edge of my desk. "Jerome's retirement is coming up, and team lead is a demanding role. Lots of presentations, travel for client meetings, long hours. Given your limitations right now, would you be open to considering a different path? Something with less pressure while you focus on your health?" The old Sarah would have panicked, would have immediately reassured him that I could handle anything. Limitations be damned. But the new Sarah, the one with a notebook full of evidence and a growing sense of clarity, simply asked, "Are you removing me from consideration for the team lead position?" Michael blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. Not at all. Just exploring options that might be better for everyone. His smile never reached his eyes. "Think about it. We can discuss more in your review next week." After he left, I immediately sent him an email. "Just to confirm our conversation today about the team lead position. You mentioned my current medical situation might make me unsuitable for the role despite my qualifications. Could you clarify if this is the official position of the company regarding advancement opportunities for employees with medical conditions? I want to make sure I understand the parameters for my upcoming review." It was a risk, being so explicit, but I needed his response in writing. 20 minutes later, I got it. "Sarah, I think you misunderstood our chat. Your qualifications aren't in question, but your current ability to fulfill all aspects of the team lead role might be temporarily affected by your injury. We value your contributions and want to find the best fit for everyone. Looking forward to discussing in your review." Translation: Yes, your injury is why you're not getting the promotion, but I'm not going to admit that in writing. I forwarded the entire exchange to my personal email, then added it to my documentation file with annotations about the verbal conversation. That evening, I finally called the number on the attorney's business card. The receptionist at Baxter & Reed connected me to Elena Baxter herself, whose voice was warm but no nonsense. Employment discrimination cases are complex, she told me after I explained my situation. But what you're describing, denial of medical coverage following a workplace injury, potential retaliation, interference with promotion based on medical status, these are red flags. You're smart to document everything. I'm not sure if I want to sue, I admitted. I just want my surgery approved and fair treatment at work. Those might be achievable without litigation, Elena said. But having legal representation often changes the dynamic. Companies respond differently when they know you're serious. Can you come in tomorrow? Bring all your documentation. The next day was Friday. My review with Michael was scheduled for Monday. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing I had to jump but uncertain where I'd land. I requested a half-day of personal time, citing a doctor's appointment, and made my way to the sleek downtown offices of Baxter & Reed. Elena was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a precisely cut bob and searching eyes that missed nothing. She read through my documentation without expression, occasionally making notes of her own. "You've been thorough," she said finally. "That's good. Most clients come to me with feelings, but no facts. You've given me both." "So I have. A case?" "Potentially several," she replied. "ADA violations if they're denying you reasonable accommodations, FMLA interference if they're pressuring you not to take medical leave, insurance bad faith if they're systematically denying valid claims. But before we go nuclear, let's try a strategic approach." She outlined a plan. I would attend my review on Monday, recording the conversation, Washington being a one-party consent state for recordings, and specifically ask about the surgery denial and the promotion decision. Depending on Michael's responses, Elena would then send a formal letter requesting accommodation, surgery approval, and reinstatement as a team lead candidate, hinting at the legal implications without explicitly threatening a lawsuit yet. Companies, like Horizon, often respond to the suggestion of legal action, she explained. They know discrimination cases are expensive, time-consuming, and terrible for public relations. And if they don't respond? Elena's smile was slight, but confident. Then we have options. But let's cross that bridge if we come to it. I left her office with a small recording device concealed in a pen. Old school but effective, Elena had said, and instructions to call her immediately after my review. The weight on my shoulders, metaphorical and literal, felt both heavier and somehow more manageable now that I wasn't carrying it alone. That weekend, I barely slept. I rehearsed questions and responses, scenarios and counter-arguments. I reread my documentation file so many times I had sections memorized. By Monday morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and hyper-alert, like I'd mainlined caffeine directly into my bloodstream. David caught me at the elevator, concern etched on his face. "Today's the review, right? Are you ready?" I patted my bag where both my notebook and the recording pen were safely tucked. "As ready as I'll ever be." He squeezed my arm gently. "Whatever happens in there, you're not alone in this. Remember that." At exactly 10 a.m., I knocked on Michael's office door, straightening my spine despite the pain that radiated down my arm. This was it. The moment I stopped being a victim of circumstance and started being the author of my own story. "Come in, Sarah," Michael called, his voice casual as if this were any ordinary meeting. "Let's talk about your future at Horizon." Little did he know, I had every word, every implication, every subtle threat documented and ready. The record of truth was no longer just in my head, where it could be dismissed or minimized. It was in black and white, in digital files and recordings, in the hands of people who knew how to use it. I stepped into his office, chin high, notebook in hand, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than pain and fear. I felt powerful. Michael's office felt smaller than usual that Monday morning. Maybe it was the tension in the air, or maybe it was the way he'd positioned his desk to ensure the morning sun glared directly into my eyes. A power move, subtle but effective, like everything Michael did. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, the same chair where he'd handed me the denial letter just days ago. "I've been looking forward to this review." I sat carefully, positioning my bag on my lap where I could easily access my notebook if needed. The recording pen was already in my blazer pocket, activated before I'd even knocked on his door. "So, Sarah," Michael began, leaning back in his chair with practiced ease. "Let's start with the positives. Your technical skills remain exceptional. The client feedback on the Westridge project was glowing. You continue to be one of our strongest individual contributors." I nodded, waiting for the inevitable pivot. "However," he continued right on cue, "I do have concerns about your leadership trajectory." He pulled out a folder and flipped it, open. "Over the past quarter, you've missed 2 client meetings due to medical appointments. You've requested modifications to your workstation that required additional budget, and several team members have noted that you've been delegating tasks you previously handled yourself." Each point was technically accurate but deliberately stripped of context. The medical appointments had been scheduled weeks in advance with his approval. The workstation modifications were standard ergonomic accommodations. The delegated tasks were all physically painful activities I couldn't perform with my injury. "I understand that your health situation has created challenges," Michael said, his voice softening with that same rehearsed sympathy. "And Horizon supports you. But the team lead role requires someone who can be fully present and capable of all aspects of the job." I took a deep breath, remembering Elena's coaching. "Can you clarify what you mean by fully present and capable? Are you referring to my shoulder injury?" Michael shifted slightly, the first crack in his composure. "I'm referring to the overall demands of the position." "Which specific demands do you believe I'm unable to fulfill due to my current medical condition?" His smile tightened. "Sarah, this isn't about your medical condition specifically. It's about the best fit for the team moving forward." "Then why mention my medical appointments and accommodations as concerns?" I pressed. "Those are protected activities under ADA and FMLA. They shouldn't factor into promotion decisions." Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected me to know my rights or to challenge him so directly. "I'm not saying they're the deciding factors. Just part of an overall pattern that suggests the timing might not be right for this particular advancement." I nodded, making a show of writing his words in my notebook. "And what about my surgery? Has there been any reconsideration of the insurance denial? That's not really part of your performance review." "It's directly related to my performance," I interrupted. "The surgery would resolve the very limitations you're citing as concerns." Michael cleared his throat. "The insurance committee made their decision based on policy guidelines. If you're still experiencing significant pain, perhaps a second opinion would be valuable. Someone who might recommend more. Conservative treatment options. Translation: find a doctor who won't recommend surgery so we don't have to cover it. I have documentation from 3 separate specialists confirming this surgery is medically necessary, not elective," I replied, pulling the letters from my bag and placing them on his desk. "Including one from the company's own recommended orthopedist." Michael glanced at the letters without touching them. "I'll pass these along to the committee, but I can't promise anything." "I understand," I said, my voice level despite the anger building inside me. "Just to make sure we're on the same page, you're informing me that I'm being passed over for the team lead position primarily due to performance concerns that arose after and in connection with my injury, and the company continues to deny coverage for the surgery that would allow me to resume full duties. Is that accurate?" I could see the trap registering in Michael's eyes. If he agreed, he was admitting to discrimination. If he denied it, he was contradicting his earlier statements. "That's an oversimplification," he said finally. "Your injury is just one factor among many being considered. What are the others?" He paused, clearly searching for something concrete. Team dynamics, project completion rates, leadership presence? "My last 3 project evaluations showed above-target completion rates," I countered. "My team satisfaction scores were the highest in the department last quarter, and I've received no previous feedback about leadership presence being an issue." Michael's smile was strained now. "Performance reviews are about patterns and trajectories, Sarah, not just statistics. I'm trying to be transparent about my concerns for your future here." "I appreciate transparency," I said, making eye contact. "In fact, I believe full transparency is crucial. So I'd like to formally request copies of all documentation related to the insurance denial decision and any internal communications regarding my eligibility for promotion." The slight widening of his eyes told me everything. There would be emails, messages, something in writing that wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. "That's not something I can provide immediately," he hedged. "You'd need to go through proper channels." "Of course," I nodded, already imagining Elena's reaction to this recording. "I'll submit a formal request to HR this afternoon. In the meantime, I'd like to know who will be receiving the team lead position and when that decision will be finalized." Michael hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Jake Coleman is the current frontrunner. The decision should be finalized by the end of next week." Jake Coleman, Michael's nephew who had joined the company just 8 months ago. The nepotism was so blatant it would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. "I see," I said simply, making another note. "Is there anything else we need to discuss for this review?" Michael seemed relieved to wrap up. "Just that we value your contributions, Sarah, and want to find the best path forward for everyone." I stood, gathering my things with deliberate care. "Thank you for your time and transparency, Michael. I'll follow up with HR regarding those documents." At the door, I paused. "One last question. When did Jake express interest in the team lead position?" "I'm not sure of the exact date," Michael replied, already turning to his computer as if dismissing me. "That's interesting," I said, "because according to the application tracking system, his application was submitted on April 16th, the day after my insurance claim was denied. What a coincidence." I left without waiting for his response, closing the door quietly behind me. David was waiting by my desk, his expression a mixture of anticipation and concern. "How did it go?" "Exactly as expected," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Can you meet me at the daily grind after work? I need to call someone first." As soon as I was safely in the stairwell, away from curious ears, I pulled out my phone and called Elena. "I got everything," I told her without preamble. The connection between the insurance denial and promotion, the admission that my medical condition is a factor in their decision, and a clear timeline showing nepotism. "Perfect," Elena responded. "Send me the recording as soon as you can. I'll have a demand letter drafted by tomorrow morning." That evening, huddled in the same corner table where Lisa and I had met, I played sections of the recording for David. His face darkened with each damning exchange. "This is worse than I thought," he said when I finished. "He's not even trying to hide it." "He thinks he doesn't have to," I replied. "He's gotten away with it before." "What happens now?" I sipped my chai, which had gone lukewarm while we talked. "My lawyer sends a demand letter tomorrow. We ask for the surgery approval, reinstatement as a candidate for the team lead position, and a formal review of their accommodation policies." "And if they refuse?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. A lawsuit would be expensive, exhausting, and could make me unhireable elsewhere even if I won. The tech industry was smaller than people thought, and companies talked. "Then we escalate," I said simply, but one step at a time. I couldn't sleep that night, partly from pain and partly from anticipation. I kept replaying the meeting in my mind, analyzing Michael's expressions, his careful choice of words, the moments when he'd realized I wasn't the easy target he'd assumed. Part of me felt powerful. I'd stood my ground. I had evidence. I had a plan. But another part felt a creeping dread. I'd worked so hard to build my career at Horizon. What if this destroyed everything? My phone buzzed at 7 a.m. Elena. Check. Your email. The letter is ready for your review. The demand letter was forceful but measured, laying out the facts without unnecessary emotion. It detailed the ADA violations, the evidence of discrimination and retaliation, and the clear conflict of interest in both the insurance denial and promotion decision. It requested a response within 5 business days. It's perfect, I told Elena after reading it twice. Send it. Are you sure? Once this goes out, there's no going back to the way things were. I thought about my shoulder, throbbing despite the prescription-strength ibuprofen I'd taken at dawn. I thought about the years of work I'd given Horizon, the weekends sacrificed, the ideas contributed, the relationships built. And I thought about Michael's smirk as he'd slid that denial letter across his desk, so confident in his power. I'm sure, I said, send it. At precisely 9 a.m., Elena's office emailed the letter to Michael, the HR director, and the company's legal counsel. By 9:15, the tension in the office was palpable. I kept my head down, focusing on my work as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the glances, hear the whispered conversations. By noon, I was summoned to a meeting with Diane Rafferty, the HR director, a woman I'd spoken to maybe twice in my 3 years at Horizon. Sarah, she greeted me with professional warmth as I entered the conference room. Thank you for meeting on such short notice. Michael was conspicuously absent. Instead, a man in a charcoal suit sat beside Diane, his expression unreadable. This is James Barrett from our legal department, Diane explained. I nodded politely but said nothing, remembering Elena's advice. Don't volunteer information. Make them ask specific questions. Don't agree to anything without consultation. We've received a rather concerning letter from your attorney this morning, Diane continued, placing a printed copy on the table. I want you to know that Horizon takes these allegations very seriously. I'm glad to hear that, I replied evenly. However, James interjected, some of the claims seem to be based on misunderstandings about company policy and procedure. I waited, saying nothing. For instance, he continued, filling the silence, insurance determinations are made by a third-party committee based on medical documentation and policy guidelines. Individual managers have no influence over these decisions. That's interesting, I said. Then why did Michael tell me the denial was because these decisions rarely get overturned and suggest I try physical therapy first, despite 3 specialists recommending surgery? James glanced at Diane, who cleared her throat. We're still gathering all the facts, Sarah. What's important now is finding a resolution that works for everyone. I outlined what would work for me in the letter, I replied. Approval of my surgery, fair consideration for the team lead position, and a review of the company's accommodation policies. The team lead position is a separate matter entirely, James said. Promotion decisions are based on multiple factors and qualifications, including whether someone has taken medical leave or requested accommodations, I asked innocently. Because according to Michael, those were explicitly factors in his decision not to consider me. If that's the case, it would be concerning, Diane admitted. But without specific evidence, I recorded our meeting, I interrupted. Washington is a one-party consent state. Every word is documented, including his admission that my injury and accommodations were factors in passing me over for promotion. The silence that followed was deafening. Diane and James exchanged a look that spoke volumes. We'd like to review that recording, James said finally. My attorney would be happy to provide it during formal discovery if we move to litigation, I replied. In the meantime, I believe the demands in the letter are reasonable and address only what's legally required of Horizon. Another silence, longer this time. We'll need to discuss this internally, Diane said. Can we schedule a follow-up meeting for tomorrow morning? I nodded. That would be fine. As I stood to leave, Diane added, Sarah, I want you to know that if any of this is substantiated, it does not reflect Horizon's values or policies. We don't tolerate discrimination of any kind. I looked her directly in the eyes. I believe you, Diane. That's why I've given the company a chance to address this before filing formal charges. The relief on her face was visible. She hadn't expected me to be so reasonable, so willing to work within the system despite what had happened. But my goal had never been to destroy Horizon, only to be treated fairly and to prevent others from facing the same discrimination. Back at my desk, I found David waiting with questioning eyes. I gave him a subtle thumbs up, and he relaxed visibly. Lisa wants to know if you're okay, he whispered. She saw you going into the conference room with the legal guy. Tell her. I'm fine, I replied. Things are moving faster than expected. That evening, Elena called for an update. You did exactly right, she said after I recounted the meeting. They're scrambling now. The recording changes everything. It's their worst nightmare. What do you think they'll offer tomorrow? Best case? Everything we asked for plus some kind of financial settlement to avoid litigation. Worst case? They'll try to find a middle ground. Maybe approve the surgery but hold firm on the promotion, or vice versa. And if it's the worst case? Then we proceed with filing the formal complaint, Elena said. But let's see what tomorrow brings. I barely slept that night, running through scenarios in my mind. By morning, my shoulder felt worse than ever, as if the physical pain was amplifying alongside the emotional stress. I arrived at work early, wanting to be prepared for whatever the day might bring. At 8:30, an hour before our scheduled meeting, I received an email from Diane. Could we move our meeting to 8:45 in the executive conference room? Additional participants will be joining us. I replied with a simple yes, then texted Elena. Meeting moved earlier, more participants. What does this mean? Her response came quickly. Could be good or bad. If CEO or higher executives are there, they're taking it seriously. Stay calm, stick to facts. Remember you have leverage. The executive conference room was on the top floor, a space I'd only seen during all-hands meetings. When I arrived, the door was closed. I knocked once, then entered to find not just Diane and James, but Alexander Chen, Horizon's CEO, along. With two other executives I recognized, but hadn't met personally. Sarah, thank you for coming, Alexander said, rising to greet me. Please have a seat. I sat at the massive conference table, feeling small but determined not to show it. Alexander. Chen had a reputation for fairness and directness, qualities that had attracted me to Horizon initially. His presence could mean anything. I've been briefed on the situation, he began without preamble, including a review of the recording from your meeting with Michael Thompson. My heart skipped. They'd already heard it? First, I want to apologize. On behalf of Horizon, he continued. What happened to you does not reflect our values or how we treat our employees. It was, to be blunt, unacceptable. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. After reviewing all the evidence, we've made several decisions, Alexander said. First, your surgery claim has been approved effective immediately, with all costs covered. Our benefits team will contact you today to expedite the process. I nodded, trying to maintain my composure despite the wave of relief washing over me. Second, the team lead position will remain open pending a fair and transparent review process. You will be given full consideration based solely on your qualifications and performance history. And Michael? I asked, the question escaping. Before I could stop it. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. Michael Thompson has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Depending on the findings, appropriate action will be taken. It was more than I'd expected. Much more. Additionally, he continued, we're conducting a comprehensive audit of all denied insurance claims over the past 18 months, particularly those classified as elective procedures. If other employees have been affected by similar decisions, we will address those cases promptly. I thought of Lisa's note. Not the first time. That's thorough, I managed. It's necessary, Alexander countered. One incident might be an anomaly. A pattern suggests a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. James slid a document across the table. We've prepared a formal response to your attorney's letter, outlining these actions and a proposed settlement to cover any additional medical expenses, lost wages due to pain-related productivity issues, and legal fees. I glanced at the figure at the bottom of the page and nearly gasped. It was substantial, enough to cover months of recovery if needed. We hope this demonstrates our commitment to making this right, Diane added. Both for you and for any other employees who may have been affected. I appreciate that, I said, finding my voice again. I'll need to review this with my attorney, of course. Of course, Alexander nodded. Take the time you need. And Sarah? Yes? Thank you for bringing this to our attention the way you did. You gave us a chance to address it internally before escalating further. That speaks to your character and your commitment to Horizon. I left the meeting in a daze, clutching the settlement offer and trying to process what had just happened. Outside the conference room, I leaned against the wall and took several deep breaths. The tension I'd been carrying for months began to unwind, replaced by a trembling sense of vindication. When I reached my desk, David was already there, eyes wide with anticipation. They approved the surgery, I whispered, and Michael's on leave. His face broke into a grin. I knew it. Lisa said Alexander was here at 7 a.m. demanding access to all of Michael's emails and the recording. Apparently, he was livid. They're auditing all the denied claims, I added, looking for patterns. David's expression sobered. That could affect a lot of people. Good people who needed help and didn't get it. I nodded, thinking of Lisa's ex-husband and others who might have suffered silently. That's why this mattered. It wasn't just about me. Later that day, I sat in the daily grind with Elena, reviewing the settlement offer line by line. This is remarkably generous, she observed. And the systematic review of other cases? That goes beyond what we asked for. Should I accept it? From a legal perspective, absolutely. It gives you everything we demanded plus financial compensation. From a personal perspective. She looked at me carefully. That depends on whether you can see yourself continuing to work at Horizon after all this. It was the question I'd been avoiding. Could I stay at a company where this had happened, even if they were making sincere efforts to fix it? Would colleagues look at me differently now? Would I always be the woman who sued, rather than a valued team member? I began slowly. I think systems only change when people stay to make sure the changes stick. If I leave, the next person might not be as lucky, might not have the documentation or support I did. Elena nodded. That's a valid perspective. Just know that either path, staying or looking elsewhere, is reasonable after what you've experienced. I signed the settlement agreement that evening. Within days, my surgery was scheduled, medical leave approved, and a new, transparent process for the team lead position announced. True to his word, Alexander launched a comprehensive review of all denied claims. 7 other employees were identified as having had legitimate medical procedures inappropriately denied. 2 had already left the company. All received retroactive approvals and compensation similar to mine. As for Michael, the investigation, uncovered emails explicitly discussing how to use the insurance denial to pressure me into stepping back from the team lead position to make room for his nephew. He was terminated, and his nephew withdrew his application. My surgery was scheduled for the following month. As I completed the pre-op paperwork, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically things had changed in just a few weeks. My shoulder still hurt. That physical reality hadn't changed, but the pain no longer came with the added burden of injustice and helplessness. The night before my surgery, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd first opened David's notebook, and begun documenting everything. The notebook itself lay before me, filled now with dates, quotes, observations, a meticulous record of what had happened and how it had been resolved. I ran my fingers over the cover, thinking about how close I'd come to accepting what Michael had done, to believing that my pain was simply bad luck, that the denial was just policy, that being passed over was a reflection of my reduced capabilities rather than discrimination. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Ready for tomorrow?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. "Nervous?" I thought about it honestly. Not about the surgery. For the first time in months, I'm actually hopeful. And I was. Not just about my shoulder healing or about the possibility of still becoming team lead when I returned. I was hopeful because I'd discovered something more valuable than a promotion. The power that comes from knowing your worth, documenting the truth, and refusing to be silenced. As I prepared for bed, I slipped the notebook into my bedside drawer, not because I thought I'd need it again, but as a reminder that sometimes justice starts with a single page, a recorded conversation, a refusal to accept what isn't right. My shoulder might take months to fully heal. The culture at Horizon might take even longer to transform. But tomorrow, when I woke up, I would do so knowing that I hadn't just fought for myself. I'd helped change a system that had been hurting people for far too long. And no matter what happened next, that knowledge was something no one could take away. The morning of my surgery arrived with a gentle rain tapping against my bedroom window. I'd been advised to arrive at Northwest Medical Center 2 hours early, which meant leaving my apartment while the sky was still dark. As I gathered, the few personal items I was allowed to bring, my phone, a thin robe, the medical paperwork, a text from my mother lit up my screen. "Driving in now. Should be there by 5:30. Love you." Mom had insisted on flying in from Phoenix for the surgery, despite my protests that it was just an outpatient procedure. What neither of us acknowledged was the comfort her presence provided. After months of fighting this battle largely alone, some burdens are lighter when shared, even silently. I made one last check of my apartment. Unplugged coffee maker, thermostat lowered, plants watered. The routine of someone expecting to return, but aware that even minor surgeries carry risks. My shoulder throbbed as I locked my door, a final reminder of why this day was necessary. The hospital corridors were quiet at that early hour, populated only by night shift nurses with tired eyes and the occasional doctor reviewing charts before rounds began. At the surgical check-in desk, a woman with silver-streaked hair and turquoise scrubs greeted me. "Sarah Mitchell? Rotator cuff repair with Dr. Williams?" I nodded. "Insurance information?" I handed over my card, a flutter of anxiety rising, despite everything. Would there be some last-minute problem? Some bureaucratic hurdle even Alexander Chen couldn't overcome? "Perfect," she said after a moment, returning my card. "Everything's been pre-approved. You're all set." Those 3 words, "everything's been pre-approved," nearly undid me. After months of fighting, of documenting, of painful meetings and sleepless nights, this simple administrative task had been completed without issue, as it should have been from the beginning. The pre-op room was divided by thin curtains, creating the illusion of privacy. A nurse named Carlos helped me change into a hospital gown, attached monitoring equipment, and started an IV with practiced efficiency. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing my quickened pulse on the monitor. A little, I admitted. Not about the surgery itself, more about what comes after. The physical therapy? He guessed, adjusting the saline drip. It's tough, but Dr. Williams is the best. His patients typically regain 90 to 95% of function. I nodded, not correcting his assumption. How could I explain that my fears weren't about physical recovery, but about returning to Horizon afterward? About facing colleagues who might view me differently now? About navigating a workplace where my victory had come at the expense of someone else's career, deserved though that consequence had been. Before I could spiral further into these thoughts, my mother arrived, her perfume announcing her presence seconds before she pushed aside the curtain. "Sweetheart," she said, rushing to my bedside. "You look pale. Have they given you something already?" "Just nerves, Mom," I assured her, accepting her kiss on my forehead. At 58, Janet Mitchell remained a force of nature, a retired high school principal who approached every situation as if it could be resolved through proper organization and sheer force of will. She'd raised me alone after my father left when I was 4, instilling in me the independence that had carried me through this ordeal. "Did you bring your laptop?" she asked, eyeing the small bag on the visitor's chair. "Mom, I'm having surgery. I'm not working today." She raised an eyebrow. "I know you, Sarah. The minute the anesthesia wears off, you'll be checking work emails." She wasn't entirely wrong. Even with approved medical leave, I'd arranged for remote access to my projects. Not from lack of trust in my team, but from the ingrained fear that any absence, any reduction in productivity might be used against me. A fear that Michael had carefully cultivated over years. Dr. Williams arrived shortly after, tablet in hand, his manner brisk but kind. "Good morning, Sarah. Ready to fix that shoulder?" "More than ready." He reviewed the procedure again. Minimally invasive arthroscopic repair, 3 small incisions, reattachment of the torn tendon, cleaning out of damaged tissue, and the expected recovery timeline. 6 weeks in a sling, limited movement for the first 2 weeks. Physical therapy 3 times weekly once healing began. Gradual return to normal activities over 4 to 6 months. "Any questions before we get started?" he asked. I had dozens, but none medical. Will this change who I am at work? Will I be seen as fragile now, as difficult, as someone who causes trouble? Instead, I asked the only one that mattered in that moment. When will I know if it worked? "You'll feel the difference almost immediately," he assured me. "The chronic pain you've been experiencing should diminish significantly once we repair the tear. Full strength and mobility will take time, but the relief, that should come much sooner." As the anesthesiologist entered and began explaining her role, my phone buzzed with incoming messages. "David, thinking of you today. You've got this. Lisa. Sending healing vibes." And surprisingly, Alexander Chen. "Wishing you a successful procedure and smooth recovery. Your position awaits. Your return." That last message settled something in me. Whatever challenges lay ahead at Horizon, I wouldn't face them without allies. The company, or at least its leadership, was invested in making things right. When the anesthesiologist asked me to count backward from 10, I made it only to 8 before darkness enveloped me. The recovery room emerged in fragments, beeping. Monitors, hushed voices, the smell of antiseptic, the cotton-thick feeling in my mouth. My left arm was immobilized in a bulky sling, a dull throb radiating from shoulder to elbow despite what I assumed were significant painkillers. "There she is!" came my mother's voice, followed by her face appearing in my blurry field of vision. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Like I was hit by a truck," I mumbled. "A very precise, surgical truck." She smiled, relief visible in the softening of her features. Dr. Williams said everything went perfectly. Clean repair, minimal damage to surrounding tissue. "You were lucky you didn't wait any longer." "Lucky?" The word struck me as ironic, given the months of fighting it had taken to reach this point. But she was right. Medically speaking, I had been fortunate. The damage could have been irreparable if left untreated much longer. The next few hours passed in a haze of nurse checks, pain medication adjustments, and discharge instructions. By mid-afternoon, I was deemed stable enough to go home, sent off with prescriptions, a physical therapy referral, and strict instructions about caring for the surgical site. My apartment seemed different somehow upon our return. Smaller, quieter, more confining than before. My mother settled me on the couch with pillows propped strategically to support my immobilized arm, then busied herself preparing the guest room where she'd stay for the next week. "You don't have to do all this," I protested weakly as she arranged my medications in daily pill organizers. "I know I don't have to," she replied without looking up. "I want to. Besides, how are you planning to wash your hair one-handed?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. So focused had I been on the surgery itself and its implications for my career. The practical realities of recovery, showering with plastic wrapped around my shoulder, sleeping upright to prevent pressure on the repair, the sheer awkwardness of dressing myself, hadn't fully registered. "Thank you," I said simply. She paused then, meeting my eyes directly. "You've always been so independent, Sarah. Even as a little girl it was, I do it myself. For everything from tying shoes to science fair projects. But sometimes strength is knowing when to accept help." The parallel to my situation at work wasn't lost on me. I'd tried to handle Michael's discrimination alone at first, believing I could power through by working harder, being more accommodating, proving my worth despite the pain. It was only when I accepted help, from David's notebook to Lisa's information to Elena's legal expertise, that things had changed. That evening, as the surgical anesthesia fully wore off, the pain intensified despite medication. I sat awake in the darkness of my living room, my mother asleep in the guest room, and confronted the physical reality of what recovery would truly entail. This wasn't a quick fix. The surgery had repaired the tear, but months of compensating. For the injury had created patterns of movement, muscle weakness, and protective habits that would take time to unlearn, much like the workplace dynamics at Horizon. The immediate problem, Michael's discrimination, had been addressed, but the environment that had allowed it to flourish would require longer to heal. Alexander's audit of denied claims was a start, but cultural change moved at its own pace. By morning, the pain had settled into a steady, manageable ache. My mother brought coffee and helped me to the bathroom, navigating the simple task with a daughter-mother choreography that was awkward but necessary. I caught my reflection in the mirror, pale, hair tangled, dark circles under my eyes, and barely recognized myself. Not just because of the surgery, but because of the person I had become through this ordeal. Someone who fought back, someone who documented, someone who changed a system. "You should check your emails," Mom said over a breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs she insisted on feeding me until I proved I could manage one-handed. "You'll feel better knowing what's happening at work." She wasn't wrong. I'd been avoiding my phone, partly from post-surgical fatigue and partly from anxiety about what might be waiting. When I finally unlocked it, my inbox was overflowing. Mostly well wishes from colleagues, updates on my projects from team members, and a formal email from HR about my approved medical leave and return to work procedures. But it was an email from Diane Rafferty that caught my attention. Subject: Team Lead Position Update. Sarah, first, I hope your surgery went well and you're on the path to recovery. I wanted to update you personally before a company-wide announcement is made later this week. Following our last conversation and Alexander's commitments, we've restructured the team lead selection process. All candidates will be evaluated by a panel of 3 department heads, none from your direct reporting line, plus an HR representative. Criteria have been standardized and explicitly exclude any consideration of medical leave, accommodations, or protected characteristics. The position remains open for applications until your scheduled return date, when interviews will begin. This ensures you'll have equal opportunity to apply and interview without pressure during your recovery. Additionally, as part of our ongoing commitment to transparency, we've revised our insurance review process. All denials of medical procedures will now receive an automatic secondary review by a different committee, and employees will have clear appeal rights with independent medical evaluation when needed. Please let me know if you have any questions. We look forward to your return when you're fully recovered. Best regards, Diane Rafferty, HR Director. I read the email twice, letting its implications sink in. They weren't just making accommodations. For me, they were changing policies, restructuring processes, building safeguards. My individual case had catalyzed systemic change. Good news? Mom asked, noting my expression. The best kind, I replied. The kind that helps more than just me. The next few days established a recovery routine. Mornings were for pain management and basic self-care. Afternoons often brought visitors, David stopping by with lunch, Lisa bringing flowers and workplace gossip about the ongoing audit of Michael's decisions. Evenings were for rest and reflection. By the fifth day, when my mother had to return to Phoenix despite her protests that I still needed her, I felt capable of managing the basic routines of daily life one-handed. The surgical pain had begun to recede, replaced by the more familiar ache of healing tissue and stiff muscles. Call me if you need anything, she insisted at the airport drop-off. Anything at all. I can be back on a plane in hours. I'll be fine, Mom, I assured her. The hard part is over. But as I drove home alone, I wondered if that was true. The physical surgery was complete, but reintegration into Horizon, facing colleagues who knew what had happened, navigating the changed power dynamics, pursuing the team lead position under such unusual circumstances. That challenge was still ahead. My first physical therapy session came at the 2-week mark. The therapist, Keisha, was a former collegiate athlete with a no-nonsense approach that I immediately appreciated. Surgery's the easy part, she told me as she gently assessed my range of motion. Anyone can knock you out and sew you back together. The real work happens here, and it's going to hurt. I'm ready, I said, meaning it. Good. She guided my arm through a series of small movements that sent pain radiating across my chest. Because from what Dr. Williams told me about your case, you should have had this surgery months ago. We're not just healing the surgical repair, we're undoing months of compensation patterns. Sounds familiar, I murmured. What's that? Nothing. I grimaced through another movement. Just drawing parallels to other parts of my life. Keisha raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Well, whatever you're comparing it to, remember, healing isn't linear. You'll have good days and bad days, progress and setbacks. The key is consistency and not getting discouraged when it feels like you're moving backward. Over the next several weeks, my life fell into a new rhythm dictated by physical therapy appointments, at-home exercises, pain, management cycles, and gradually increasing periods of productivity. I began working remotely on a limited basis, just enough to stay connected to my projects without impeding recovery. David called or visited almost daily, keeping me updated on the changes at Horizon. The investigation into Michael had expanded beyond insurance denials to include performance reviews, bonus distributions, and promotion decisions, revealing patterns of favoritism and discrimination that had gone unchecked for years. It's like turning over a rock, he told me over takeout Thai food in my living room one evening. No one realized how much was hiding underneath. Or they didn't want to know, I countered, struggling to manage chopsticks one-handed. It's easier to ignore problems when acknowledging them means more work. He nodded, considering this. Maybe, But Alexander seems genuinely committed to fixing things. He's brought in external consultants to review all HR policies. They're even creating an anonymous reporting system for employees to flag concerns, without fear of retaliation. Has there been any news about the team lead position? David hesitated. They're holding it open as promised. But Sarah, you should know there's talk about creating a new role, something higher level that would oversee multiple teams, including the one you'd have led as team lead. I set down my fork. What kind of role? Director of Project Implementation, reporting directly to Alexander. The rumor is they want someone who understands the company's technical needs, but also has demonstrated integrity and a commitment to fair workplace practices. And you think? I think they're designing it with you in mind, he said simply. But taking it would mean skipping the team lead position entirely. I sat back, processing this information. The role sounded perfect, exactly the kind of bridge position between technical and business concerns that I'd always excelled at. But it also felt unearned somehow, a reward for whistleblowing rather than merit. I don't want special treatment, I said finally. I just wanted what I deserved in the first place. Is it special treatment? David challenged. Or is it recognition of skills and qualities they didn't properly value before? You coordinated multiple projects simultaneously. You built relationships across departments. You improved processes no one else even questioned. And when something was wrong, you documented it meticulously and gave the company a chance to fix it before going public. Those are exactly the qualities they need in leadership. His perspective gave me pause. Had I been undervaluing myself just as Horizon initially had? Seeing my worth primarily through the lens of technical contribution rather than the full spectrum of what I brought to the table? At my 6-week checkup, Dr. Williams pronounced the surgical repair healing beautifully and cleared me to begin. More intensive physical therapy. I could remove the sling for longer periods, start gentle strengthening exercises, and gradually return to normal daily activities. When can I return to work? I asked. Physically? You could start part-time. In-office work now with accommodations, he replied. But I'd recommend waiting the full 8 weeks we originally discussed for full-time return. Your body is still healing, even if the pain has subsided. I nodded, already calculating how this timeline aligned with the team lead selection process. And long-term prognosis? With consistent therapy and proper care, I expect near-complete recovery, he said. You might notice some weather-related aching or slight reduction in extreme ranges of motion, but for day-to-day activities and even most athletic pursuits, you should be fine. It was the best possible news, yet I felt a strange ambivalence, leaving his office. For so long, my energy had been focused on getting the surgery approved, on documenting Michael's discrimination, on fighting for fair treatment. Now that those battles were won and my physical recovery was progressing well, I found myself facing questions I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Did I actually want to return to Horizon, even with Michael gone and policies changed? Did I want the team lead position I'd fought for, or the new director role that might be created? What kind of workplace would truly value the person I had become through this experience? These questions accompanied me through the remaining weeks of my medical leave, surfacing during physical therapy sessions, during late-night journaling, during conversations with my mother and David and Elena. The answers didn't come easily, or all at once, but gradually clarified as my physical strength returned. By week 7, I was cleared to drive again and decided to visit Horizon before my official return. I wanted to feel the atmosphere, to gauge my own reactions to the space and people, to test whether reconciliation was possible or if the wounds, like some physical injuries, would never fully heal. The security guard greeted me with a smile as I badged in. "Good to see you back, Ms. Mitchell." The familiar weight of my employee ID around my neck, the hum of the HVAC system, the scent of industrial carpet cleaner and coffee. It all felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like returning to a childhood home now occupied by strangers. As I rode the elevator to my floor, my heart rate increased. Would people stare, whisper, avoid me? The uncertainty reminded me of my first day at Horizon 3 years ago, full of potential and anxiety in equal measure. The doors opened and I stepped into a department physically unchanged yet fundamentally different. David spotted me first, his face lighting up as he crossed the floor. "Sarah, you didn't say you were coming in today." He gave me a careful hug, mindful of my healing shoulder. "Impromptu decision," I explained. "Wanted to dip my toes back in before next week." Word of my arrival spread quickly. Lisa appeared from HR. Colleagues stopped by my desk with welcome back cards and questions about my recovery. And even Jerome, whose retirement had been postponed during the leadership transitions, made a point of telling me how the department had missed my problem-solving skills. But it was the absence that spoke loudest. Michael's office, visible through glass walls at the end of the floor, sat empty. His personal items had been removed, his name stripped from the door. The physical erasure of his presence felt both vindicating and sobering, a reminder of how completely one person's career could collapse when their actions finally faced scrutiny. "Do you have time to talk?" came a voice behind me. I turned to find Alexander Chen, his expression warm but unreadable. "Of course," I replied, following him to a small conference room away from curious eyes. When we were seated, he studied me for a moment before speaking. "How are you really doing, Sarah? Beyond the polite answers you've been giving everyone else?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. "I'm processing," I admitted. "Physically, I'm healing well. Emotionally and professionally. I'm still figuring out what comes next." He nodded. "That's completely understandable. What happened to you, what we allowed to happen through inadequate oversight, wasn't just a medical issue or an insurance problem. It was a breach of the trust every employee should be able to place in their workplace." "It was," I agreed. "But the response since then has been encouraging." "We're trying," he said. The audit uncovered more issues than I'd like to admit. Michael's behavior was the most egregious, but not isolated. We had systemic failures that affected dozens of employees over years. And now? Now we're rebuilding. New policies, better oversight, clearer reporting channels. He paused. "Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you today. Diane mentioned that David might have told you about the new director position we're creating." I nodded. "It's real," he confirmed. "Director of Project Implementation and Workplace Advocacy, a dual role focusing on both operational excellence and ensuring fair treatment for team members. The position would report directly to me and have significant input on policy decisions." My heart raced. "It sounds impressive. It's also challenging," Alexander continued. "We need someone who understands our technical workflows, but also has demonstrated commitment to workplace equity. Someone who can document processes, identify inefficiencies, build consensus across departments, and stand firm when principles are at stake." He met my eyes directly. "In other words, someone with exactly the skills you've demonstrated throughout this situation." "Are you offering me the position?" I asked, wanting clarity. "I'm telling you it exists and that you would be an exceptional candidate." His tone was measured. "When you return next week, the formal job posting will be live, and you're welcome to apply. But I want to be transparent. Your experience and actions these past months are precisely what shaped our understanding of what this role needs to be." I considered this carefully. Some might see it as a way to keep me quiet about what happened, a promotion in exchange for not making waves. Alexander didn't flinch at the implied accusation. "That's a fair concern, which is why the role includes public advocacy components, speaking at industry events about workplace equity, helping develop transparency metrics we would publish quarterly, directly overseeing our accommodation and medical leave processes." He leaned forward slightly. "We don't want silence, Sarah. We want transformation. and we believe you could help lead that transformation if you choose to." "I'll need time to think about it," I said finally. "Of course. Take until your official return date." He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "Whatever you decide, team lead, director, or even opportunities elsewhere, I hope you know that your actions have already created lasting change. At Horizon, that legacy remains regardless of your next steps." As I drove home that afternoon, Alexander's words echoed in my mind. Legacy, change, transformation. The concepts seemed too grand for what I had done, simply documenting unfair treatment and seeking proper medical care. Yet the ripple effects had clearly extended far beyond my individual case. At a stoplight, I glanced at my shoulder, the small scars from the arthroscopic surgery already fading, the joint moving with increasing freedom as healing progressed. Physical recovery had its own timeline, its own process that couldn't be rushed. Perhaps professional and emotional recovery followed similar patterns, gradual, non-linear, requiring both outside intervention and internal commitment. The light turned green, and I accelerated forward. The decision about the director position could wait a few more days. For now, it was enough to know I had options, agency, and a voice that had finally been heard. Whatever path I chose next would be from a position of strength, not desperation. And that perhaps was the most meaningful victory of all. My first morning back at Horizon arrived with surprising normalcy. The alarm sounded at 6:15, just as it had hundreds of mornings before. The coffee maker gurgled to life on its timer. Traffic on the commute moved with its usual stop-and-go rhythm. Yet everything had changed. My shoulder now moved with greater ease than it had in months. My position at the company had evolved from victim to catalyst, and Michael's office remained conspicuously empty as I passed it on my way to my desk. Lisa intercepted me before I could even set down my bag. "Welcome back officially," she said, her voice low despite the early hour and relative privacy. "You should know, there's a 9 a.m. all-hands meeting. Alexander announced it yesterday after you left." "Any idea what it's about?" I asked, though I had my suspicions. "The audit results," she confirmed, "and organizational changes. That's all anyone's saying officially, but there are rumors." She trailed off, glancing around. "About the new director position?" She nodded. "So you've heard. Half the department thinks it's being created specifically for you." "It's more complicated than that," I replied, unwilling to share the details of my conversation with Alexander. That meeting had felt private somehow, a recognition of mutual respect rather than a transactional job offer. By 8:55, the main conference room buzzed with nervous energy. I chose a seat toward the back, wanting to observe rather than be observed. David slid into the chair beside me, giving my good shoulder a supportive squeeze. "Big day," he whispered. "Apparently." Alexander arrived precisely at 9, accompanied by Diane from HR and 2 board members I recognized from company photos but had never met in person. The room quieted immediately, anticipation palpable in the stillness. "Thank you all for being here," Alexander began without preamble. "As you know, Horizon has undergone significant internal assessment over the past 2 months. Today, I want to share the findings of that assessment and the changes we're implementing as a result." He proceeded to outline the audit's scope: employee, claims across all departments, performance review patterns, promotion decisions, accommodation requests, and its methodology. His delivery was matter of fact, neither dramatizing nor minimizing the findings. "What we discovered," he continued, "was a pattern of inconsistent application of company policies, particularly in insurance approvals and accommodation requests. In total, 23 employees were identified as having experienced some form of disparate treatment. 7 were denied legitimate medical procedures. 12 received negative performance assessments following medical leave or accommodation requests. 4 were passed over for promotions despite superior qualifications. Murmurs rippled through the room. The numbers were higher than even I had anticipated. While the most significant issues were concentrated in specific departments, the audit revealed company-wide gaps in oversight and accountability. For that, I take personal responsibility. The frank admission silenced the whispers. Alexander wasn't deflecting blame or minimizing findings. He was owning the institutional failure. Now, to address these findings, he continued, we're implementing several immediate changes. First, all affected employees have been contacted individually regarding remediation of their specific situations. For some, this means retroactive approval of medical procedures or accommodations. For others, reconsideration for positions they were unfairly denied. In cases where financial harm occurred, appropriate compensation is being provided. He paused, allowing the information to settle before proceeding to the structural changes: new reporting systems, revised approval processes for insurance, claims, external reviews of accommodation requests, and enhanced training for all managers. Finally, Alexander said, his gaze sweeping the room, we're creating 2 new leadership positions to ensure these changes become permanent parts of our culture, not just temporary responses to a crisis. Here it was, the formal announcement of the director role he'd discussed with me. But 2 positions? That was new information. First, a director of compliance and ethics who will report directly to our board of directors, providing independent oversight of all company policies and their application. Second, a director of project implementation and workplace advocacy who will report to me, focusing on operational excellence while ensuring equitable treatment for all team members. He outlined both roles in detail, emphasizing their independence, authority, and central importance to Horizon's future. The director of compliance would be an external hire, someone with no existing ties to company politics. The second role, however, for the director of project implementation and workplace advocacy, we are considering both internal and external candidates. The job posting goes live today. I encourage qualified employees to apply, particularly those with demonstrated commitment to workplace equity. His eyes found mine briefly in the crowd, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. The message was clear. The position was open to all, but my experience made me a natural candidate. The meeting concluded with an extended Q&A session. Employees asked pointed questions about how the new systems would prevent future abuses, whether managers who had participated in discrimination would face consequences, how affected employees would be protected from retaliation. Alexander, Diane, and the board members answered each question directly, without corporate doublespeak or evasion. As people filed out afterward, conversations hummed with a mixture of shock at the audit's findings and cautious optimism about the proposed changes. I remained seated, needing a moment to process everything. David lingered beside me. "You're going to apply for the director position, right?" he asked when the room had emptied. "I'm considering it." "Considering it?" His eyebrows shot up. "Sarah, they practically designed it for you." "That's part of what I'm considering," I admitted. "I don't want a position created out of guilt or obligation. I want to earn whatever comes next." David shook his head. "You did earn it. Not by being injured or filing complaints, but by everything you did before that. The projects you managed, the relationships you built, the improvements you suggested that no one else thought of. Your handling of the discrimination just highlighted qualities you already had." His perspective mirrored Alexander's from our private conversation. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was still undervaluing my contributions, seeing my worth primarily through the traditional metrics of technical output, rather than the full spectrum of skills I brought to the table. "I'll think about it," I promised. "Good. And when you're done thinking, I'll help you polish your application." Back at my desk, I found a sleek brochure detailing the new organizational structure and reporting channels. Flipping through it, I was struck by how thoroughly Horizon was rebuilding itself, not just adding oversight, but fundamentally restructuring how decisions were made and reviewed. An email notification pinged, the official job posting for the director position. The description was comprehensive, outlining responsibilities that spanned operational oversight, policy development, employee advocacy, and public-facing educational initiatives. The qualifications section read like a summary of my career at Horizon, plus the skills I'd developed during my documentation process: attention to detail, ethical decision-making, ability to navigate complex systems, commitment to equity. I began drafting an application during lunch, the words flowing more easily than I'd expected. Rather than downplaying the discrimination experience, I incorporated it as a central case study demonstrating my approach to problem-solving, my commitment to systematic documentation, and my ability to advocate for change while giving the organization opportunity to correct course without external intervention. By mid-afternoon, I had a solid first draft. As I was reviewing it, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Have time for coffee after work? Important update." We met at the Daily Grind, which had become our unofficial meeting spot through this ordeal. Elena arrived in a sharply tailored suit, legal briefcase in hand, looking more formal than usual. "What's the update?" I asked after we'd ordered. "The settlement agreements for all affected employees have been finalized," she replied, "including additional compensation for those who left the company due to discrimination." She pulled a document from her briefcase. "This lists everyone who received remediation. I thought you'd want to see the impact." The list contained 23 names, including mine. Some I recognized as current colleagues. Others were unfamiliar, people who had left before the discrimination was addressed. Beside each name was a brief description of their situation, and the resolution provided. Morgan Chen, denied accommodation for repetitive stress injury. Resolution, retroactive approval of ergonomic equipment, compensation for out-of-pocket medical expenses, reinstatement of performance rating. Jamal Washington, passed over for promotion following paternity leave. Resolution, retroactive promotion. With salary adjustment, back pay for wage differential. Eliza Suarez, terminated after requesting FMLA leave for parent care. Resolution, offered reinstatement with seniority or severance package, compensation for lost wages. The list continued, each entry representing someone whose career had been damaged, whose health had been compromised, whose trust had been violated. Looking at it in its entirety was sobering, the collective harm caused by one manager's discrimination and the system that enabled it. "This is extensive," I said finally. "It is," Elena agreed, "and it wouldn't exist without you. Every person on that list is receiving justice because you documented what happened to you and came forward." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the credit. "I just wanted my surgery approved. I wasn't trying to start a movement." "Most positive change begins that way," she said simply. "Someone stands up for themselves, not realizing they're also standing for others." She sipped her coffee. "By the way, I heard about the new director position. Are you applying?" "I'm drafting the application now, but I'm still not sure if it's what I want." Elena studied me thoughtfully. "You know, when clients win cases, like yours, they often face this dilemma. Do they stay and help implement changes? Do they leave for a fresh start elsewhere? There's no universal right answer. What do most people do?" "About 60% leave," she admitted. "But those who stay and take on leadership roles often create the most lasting impact. They transform organizations from within." I considered this. What would you do if you were me? "I'd evaluate the sincerity of the company's changes," she replied without hesitation. "Are they performative or substantive? Is leadership genuinely committed or just managing PR? Based on what I've seen of Horizon's response, particularly Alexander's personal involvement and the thorough audit. I'd say they're among the more genuine corporate turnarounds I've witnessed. Her assessment aligned with my own observations. The changes being implemented went far beyond what would be required to silence a potential lawsuit. They reflected real commitment to systemic improvement. I'm leaning toward applying, I told her. But part of me wonders if I'll always be seen as the woman who sued, rather than a leader in my own right. That perception fades with time and results, Elena assured me. If you deliver in the role, eventually people forget how you got there and focus on what you've accomplished since. I left our meeting with greater clarity, if not complete certainty. On the drive home, I mentally outlined the additions I wanted to make to my application, emphasizing my vision for the role beyond just preventing discrimination, highlighting specific operational improvements I could implement, detailing how my technical background would inform my advocacy work. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my desk. Jerome, the retiring team lead whose position had been at the center of my original conflict with Michael. "Got a minute?" asked, hovering awkwardly beside my chair. "Of course." I gestured to the empty seat beside me. Jerome settled himself with a sigh, his expression serious. "I've been wanting to talk to you since everything happened, but wanted to wait until you were back full-time." He paused. "I need to apologize." "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For not seeing what was happening," he said. "Michael and I had weekly meetings about department operations. He mentioned your injury, your accommodation requests, your insurance claim. I should have questioned why he brought those up so often. I should have noticed when he started suggesting his nephew for my position right after your claim was denied. I should have connected the dots." His regret seemed sincere, his weathered face lined with genuine remorse. "You weren't responsible for Michael's actions," I said gently. "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I was in a position to notice patterns. And I didn't. That's on me." He straightened in his chair. "Anyway, I wanted you to know I've delayed my retirement by 3 months to help transition the department through these changes. And I've told Alexander that regardless of who gets the team lead position, you were always my first choice." I should have said that louder and sooner. The acknowledgement struck me unexpectedly. Throughout the ordeal, I'd focused on Michael's discrimination and its direct impact on my career. I hadn't considered the allies I might have had if I'd spoken up earlier, the support that might have been available if I'd shared my documentation with others in leadership positions. "Thank you for telling me," I said, meaning it. Jerome nodded awkwardly. "Good luck with the director application. The department needs someone who isn't afraid to speak up when things go sideways." With that, he rose and moved back to his own desk, leaving me with a new perspective on the complex web of responsibility and oversight that had failed under Michael's management. By the end of the week, I had submitted my application for the director position and begun interviewing candidates for the team lead role, a responsibility Alexander had asked me to take on regardless of whether I moved into the new position. The process of evaluating others for a role I had once coveted myself created a strange full-circle moment. I found myself asking candidates about their approach to accommodations, their experiences supporting team members through medical issues, their philosophy on work-life balance during health challenges. The weekend brought another physical therapy session with Keisha, who noted marked improvement in my range of motion. "You're progressing faster than expected," she observed, guiding my arm through an elevated rotation that would have been impossible a month ago. "How's the pain level?" "Almost gone during normal activities," I replied, "only noticeable with specific movements or extended computer work." She nodded approvingly. "That tracks with the healing timeline. Any issues back at work? Ergonomic? Setup working for you?" "It's fine. They've been very accommodating." An understatement, given the company-wide changes that had stemmed from my situation. Keisha gave me a knowing look. "You know, I see a lot of workplace injuries in this clinic. Most companies do the bare minimum. just enough to avoid legal issues. Sounds like yours went above and beyond. They did, I acknowledged. Though, it took some convincing. Usually does, she said matter-of-factly, making notes in my chart. People don't change systems until the cost of staying the same exceeds the cost of changing. You must have made a compelling case. Her assessment was perceptive. I had indeed made the cost of maintaining discriminatory practices clear, not just through Elena's legal pressure, but by meticulously documenting the human and operational impact of Michael's decisions. I suppose I did, I agreed. The following Tuesday, I received an email requesting an interview for the director position. Despite having anticipated this next step, seeing the formal invitation sent a flutter of nerves through me. This wasn't just another job interview. It represented a potential transformation of my professional identity, from individual contributor, seeking fair treatment, to organizational leader responsible for ensuring that treatment for others. The interview panel would include Alexander, 2 board members, and an external consultant specializing in workplace equity, a diverse group that would examine my qualifications from multiple perspectives. The message included a request to prepare a 15-minute presentation on my vision for the role, including specific initiatives I would prioritize in the first 6 months. I worked on the presentation each evening that week, refining my ideas about integrating operational excellence with workplace advocacy. My concept centered on transparency, creating clear documentation of decision-making processes, establishing objective criteria for evaluations and promotions, developing metrics for measuring accommodation responsiveness, and implementing regular, public reporting of the company's progress. By the time the interview arrived the following Monday, my presentation had evolved into a comprehensive strategic plan that drew on both my technical background and my recent experience navigating Horizon's flawed systems. As I set up my materials in the executive conference room, I felt a surprising calm. Whatever the outcome, I had already helped change the company in meaningful ways. This interview was not about proving my worth, but about determining whether this particular role aligned with my skills and vision. The panel entered precisely on time. Alexander greeted me warmly, making introductions to the board members, Anita Desai and Marcus Johnson, and the external consultant, Dr. Renee Washington, whose research on workplace equity I had studied in preparation. "Thank you for applying, Sarah," Alexander began. "We're looking forward to hearing your vision for this position." My presentation flowed more smoothly than I had anticipated. I outlined my understanding of Horizon's challenges based on both the audit findings and my personal experience, then detailed my 3-phase approach to transformation: immediate policy corrections, medium-term cultural development, and long-term sustainability measures. The goal, I concluded, isn't just to prevent future instances of discrimination, but to create systems where equitable treatment is built into our operational DNA, where doing the right thing is also the easiest thing, the default path rather than the exception. The questions that followed were thoughtful and challenging. Anita asked about measuring success in a role that spanned both operational and advocacy responsibilities. Marcus probed how I would balance accountability with collaboration when working with departments resistant to change. Dr. Washington inquired about my approach to addressing unconscious bias in technical evaluation processes. I answered each question honestly, drawing on concrete examples from my time at Horizon and acknowledging areas where I would need to develop new expertise. When asked about potential conflicts between business objectives and equity considerations, I outlined a decision-making framework that integrated both rather than treating them as opposing forces. "Final question," Alexander said as the interview neared its conclusion. "Why do you want this particular role, especially given your experience with the company over the past several months? Many in your position might prefer a fresh start elsewhere." It was the question I had anticipated, yet still found challenging to answer concisely. I took a moment before responding. "I considered leaving," I admitted. "It would have been easier in some ways. But throughout this experience, I've realized That change requires both pressure and presence. External pressure can force acknowledgement of problems, but internal presence is needed to implement lasting solutions. I met each interviewer's gaze in turn. I want this role because I've seen both sides of Horizon, its potential and its flaws. I understand the technical challenges our teams face and the human impact when systems fail. Most importantly, I believe in what this company could become with the right structures in place. Alexander nodded, something like appreciation flickering in his expression. Thank you for your candor and for your time today. We'll be making a decision by the end of the week. As I gathered my materials, Dr. Washington approached me. Regardless of this position, she said quietly, I hope you'll consider documenting your experience for broader sharing. Stories like yours are powerful catalysts for institutional change beyond just one company. Her suggestion stayed with me as I returned to my desk, contemplating how my individual experience might contribute to systemic improvement across other organizations. Perhaps my journey from employee seeking accommodation to potential director of workplace advocacy contained lessons that could help others navigate similar challenges. That evening, as I completed my physical therapy exercises at home, I reflected on the parallel healing processes I had undergone. The physical repair of my shoulder and the professional reconstruction of my workplace. Both had required external intervention, careful documentation, consistent follow-through, and a willingness to endure discomfort for long-term improvement. Both were progressing well, though neither was yet complete. My phone rang, interrupting these reflections. The caller ID showed Alexander Chen. Sarah, he said when I answered. I know we said decisions would be made by week's end, but the panel was unanimous. We'd like to offer you the director position, effective immediately if you're willing. The moment stretched as I absorbed his words. Despite having applied for the role and presented my vision for it, part of me had remained skeptical that Horizon would actually entrust such significant responsibility to someone who had so recently challenged its practices. I'm honored, I replied finally, and yes, I accept. Excellent. His relief was audible. There's something else you should know. The board has approved funding for a dedicated team reporting to you. Professionals focused specifically on accommodation case management, policy development, and training. You'll have resources, not just responsibility. This was unexpected and demonstrated seriousness about the role beyond what I had anticipated. Thank you for that commitment. It will make implementation much more effective. We'll announce the appointment tomorrow morning, Alexander continued. In the meantime, I've sent over the formal offer letter for your review. The email arrived as we spoke. The compensation figure substantially higher than I had expected, with additional budget allocations for the initiatives I had outlined in my presentation. This wasn't a symbolic position or a token response to a lawsuit threat. It was a foundational leadership role with genuine authority and resources. After we disconnected, I sat in my living room, shoulder aching slightly from the day's activities, but mind racing with possibilities. The notebook David had given me months ago, where I had first documented Michael's discrimination, still sat in my desk drawer. From those first hesitant entries to a director-level position dedicated to preventing similar experiences for others, represented a journey I could never have anticipated. My phone buzzed again. A text from David. Heard. The news from Alexander. Congratulations, Director Mitchell. You earned this. Director Mitchell. The title felt strange yet fitting. Not because I had fought and won a discrimination battle, but because I had identified systematic problems, documented their impact, and developed solutions that benefited not just myself, but the entire organization. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, announcing my appointment, building my team, implementing the strategies I had outlined. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply acknowledge how far I had come from that moment in Michael's office. When a denied insurance claim had seemed like the end of my career prospects, rather than the beginning of an unexpected new chapter. The journey had never been about a single surgery or promotion. It had been about recognizing worth, my own and that of every employee whose medical needs, accommodations, or protected characteristics had been used against them. It had been about transforming documentation from a defensive tactic into a tool for systemic change. As I prepared for bed, my healed shoulder moving with new freedom, I felt ready for whatever came next. Not because the path would be easy, but because I had learned to navigate difficult terrain while creating maps that others could follow. That, perhaps, was the most meaningful outcome of all. 1 year after my appointment as Director of Project Implementation and Workplace Advocacy, I stood at a podium in the Seattle Convention Center, facing an audience of human resource professionals, corporate attorneys, and workplace equity advocates. The agenda listed my presentation title, Documentation as Revolution: How Individual Record-Keeping Can Transform Workplace Culture. Transformation doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures, I began, scanning the attentive faces. Sometimes it begins with a single note in a small black notebook. The notebook itself sat on the podium beside me. The original, one David had given me, now filled with dated entries and marginalia. I had considered creating a polished version for this presentation, but decided the authenticity of the original carried greater impact. Its worn cover and dog-eared pages told their own story about the process of change. A year ago, I was a project coordinator with a shoulder injury, fighting for a surgery my employer's insurance had deemed elective. Today, I lead a team dedicated to ensuring that scenario never happens to another employee at my company. The bridge between those two realities wasn't built by lawyers or executives or policy experts, though all played important roles. It was built by documentation, by the simple, powerful act of recording what happened, when it happened, who was involved, and what was said. As I shared my journey, from injury to denial to advocacy to leadership, I observed the audience's reactions. Some nodded in recognition, likely having witnessed similar patterns in their own organizations. Others took notes, perhaps considering how their company's practices might need examination. A few shifted uncomfortably, possibly seeing reflections of their own behavior in my descriptions of systemic failure. The most significant insight I've gained through this process is that individual documentation isn't just about protecting yourself, though it certainly serves that purpose. It's about creating objective reality in situations where gaslighting and power dynamics often distort perception. It's about transforming individual injustice into evidence of institutional problems that require institutional solutions. After my presentation, during the networking reception, a steady stream of attendees approached me with questions, shared experiences, and business cards. A woman in her early 30s with a medical boot on her foot waited until the crowd had thinned before introducing herself. "Your story hit home," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Chen, HR Director at Fulcrum Technologies. We're currently revising our accommodation policies, and I'd love to learn more about the metrics dashboard you mentioned, the one that tracks response times for accommodation requests." "Happy to share it," I replied, recognizing the company. Name: Fulcrum was a Horizon competitor. It's been our most effective tool for identifying departmental patterns and holding managers accountable. Emily hesitated, then lowered her voice. "To be honest, we're undergoing our own reckoning right now. 3 discrimination complaints in 6 months, all related to medical accommodations. Leadership is finally paying attention, but we're struggling with implementation." I nodded, understanding completely. The technical solutions are actually the easy part. The cultural shift is where the real work happens. We exchanged contact information, and I promised to send her our framework, not because Horizon wanted to help a competitor, but because the principles of workplace equity transcended corporate boundaries. The challenges Emily described at Fulcrum mirrored what we had faced at Horizon. Sharing our solutions might prevent unnecessary suffering for employees caught in flawed systems. That evening in my hotel room, as I reviewed presentation feedback, surveys, my phone rang with a call from Alexander. "How did it go?" he asked without preamble. "Better than expected. We've already received inquiries from 3 companies about consulting on their accommodation processes. Excellent." His satisfaction was evident. "The board will be pleased. They see your outreach work as both ethically necessary and strategically valuable for our reputation." In the year since my appointment, Alexander had proven consistently supportive of my department's initiatives, both internal improvements and external advocacy. What had begun as a defensive response to potential litigation had evolved into a genuine commitment to workplace equity as a core business value. "There's something else you should know," he continued. "The quarterly metrics are in. Accommodation. Request approvals are up 72%, while processing time has decreased by half. Employee satisfaction with the process has increased across all departments." The statistics confirmed what I had observed anecdotally, that our systematic approach to documentation, transparent decision-making, and accountability was producing measurable improvements in employee experience. "That's excellent news," I replied. "Any areas still showing resistance?" "Engineering continues to lag slightly on implementation timeframes," he admitted. "But even they've improved 30% over last quarter. Your targeted training sessions seem to be working." After we hung up, I opened my laptop to check emails before sleep. Among the post-presentation feedback and meeting requests was a message from David, now heading his own project team at Horizon. Subject: "You might want to see this, Sarah. Someone shared this on our internal message board today. Thought you'd appreciate seeing the ripple effects of your work." David attached was a screenshot of an anonymous employee post. I've never shared this publicly before, but I almost left Horizon last year after being denied time off for mental health treatment. I was afraid of retaliation if I appealed. Then the new accommodation policies were implemented, and I decided to try again through the new system. Not only was my request approved within 48 hours, but my manager received guidance on supporting my transition back to work afterward. I completed treatment 3 months ago and recently received a performance recognition award. The changes in this company are real. Thank you to whoever made this happen. I sat back, a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. Pride in the tangible impact of our work. Sadness for what this employee and others had endured before the changes. Determination to continue improving systems that affected real lives in profound ways. The following morning, as I checked out of the hotel, I received a text from Lisa. "Just heard about your presentation yesterday. Wish I could have been there. Still up for lunch tomorrow?" Lisa had been my first ally in this journey, the one who had slipped me a note warning that Michael's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. Now she headed the compliance team that worked alongside my department, ensuring accountability for the policies we developed. "Absolutely," I texted back. "The usual place at 12:30? Our monthly lunches had become a tradition, a time to synchronize our complementary efforts, share challenges, and remember how far we had come. Lisa's perspective as someone who had witnessed the old system from within HR provided valuable insight as we built new approaches. Back in Seattle the next day, I arrived early at our favorite lunch spot near the office. As I waited for Lisa, I found myself reflecting on the multiple transformations that had unfolded since that first painful meeting in Michael's office. My physical transformation had been the most straightforward. After surgery and dedicated physical therapy, my shoulder had healed completely. I occasionally felt twinges during weather changes, as Dr. Williams had predicted, but had regained full function for daily activities and even returned to hiking on weekends. My professional transformation had been more dramatic and complex. The shift from individual contributor to department director had required developing new skills, building different relationships, and embracing a more visible, public-facing role. Where I had once focused primarily on technical solutions, I now balanced operational excellence with advocacy, policy development, and cultural change. But perhaps the most significant transformation had been institutional. Horizon now featured in case studies of corporate turnarounds, held up as an example of how organizations could meaningfully address discrimination rather than merely managing its legal consequences. The systems we had built, transparent documentation, requirements, multi-level approval processes, regular equity audits, had become part of the company's operational DNA, not dependent on any single person's advocacy. Deep thoughts? Lisa asked, sliding into the seat across from me. Just reflecting on how much has changed? I replied. Speaking of change, she said, opening her menu. Have you heard about Michael? I shook my head. After his termination, I had deliberately avoided seeking information about his whereabouts or activities, not wanting to remain connected to that chapter of my life. He's working at Westridge Solutions now, she continued. Mid-level position, no direct reports. Apparently, they require him to complete quarterly ethics training as a condition of employment. The news was surprising, but somehow fitting. His career had been impacted but not destroyed, experiencing consequences proportional to his actions rather than the complete professional annihilation he had threatened for others. Karma, I observed simply. Indeed. Lisa smiled. On a more positive note, the final candidate for the team lead position is interviewing tomorrow. Strong technical background, excellent people skills, and a personal history with accommodation needs. Jerome is thrilled. The position had remained vacant longer than expected, with Jerome extending his retirement timeline to ensure continuity while we implemented organizational changes. Finding the right successor, someone with both technical expertise and commitment to the new cultural values, had proven challenging but worthwhile. After lunch, walking back to the office, I detoured through a small park where cherry trees were beginning to bloom. The delicate pink blossoms reminded me of the cyclical nature of growth, the dormant periods that precede visible change, the unseen strengthening that happens beneath the surface before transformation becomes apparent. My journey from injured employee to corporate director had followed a similar pattern. The painful period of discrimination and denial had contained the seeds of growth that eventually produced something beautiful and beneficial, not just for me, but for an entire organization of people. At my desk that afternoon, I found a package, waiting, a delivery from the publisher who had contracted me to write a book about workplace documentation and advocacy. The package contained sample cover designs, each featuring images of notebooks, pens, and professional settings. I had been working on the manuscript for 6 months, sharing the expanded version of what I had presented at the conference, a practical guide for employees navigating workplace challenges and for organizations seeking to improve their systems proactively. As I reviewed the cover options, a notification appeared on my calendar, my final physical therapy evaluation with Keisha, scheduled for the following week. Though I had completed the prescribed rehabilitation program months ago, we had arranged this follow-up assessment to document the long-term outcomes of my surgery and recovery. The symmetry struck me, final documentation of my physical healing coinciding with the creation of a book that would help others document their workplace experiences. Both represented conclusions to chapters in my life, but also new beginnings and opportunities to share what I had learned. Later that evening, as I packed up to leave, I glanced at the small black notebook that now sat on my desk in a clear display case, a personal reminder of where this journey had begun. Beside it stood a row of identical notebooks that I provided, 2 employees who sought guidance from my department, each containing the same introductory page. Documentation is not about blame or vengeance. It is about creating clarity where confusion might reign, establishing patterns where isolated incidents might be dismissed, and ultimately, transforming individual experience into institutional improvement. Begin with a simple entry: date, time. What happened? Who was involved? What was said? Add context as needed. Be factual, be consistent, be thorough. This record is your voice when systems or power dynamics might otherwise silence you. Remember, the truth matters, and writing it down gives it power beyond your individual experience. As I closed my office door, I felt the weight of responsibilities I had accepted, but also the lightness that comes from purposeful work. What had begun as a desperate attempt to secure necessary medical care had evolved into a career dedicated to ensuring others never faced similar barriers. My boss had denied my health insurance claim for surgery, not realizing I was taking notes for what would become not just a lawsuit, but a revolution in how an entire company operated. Sometimes transformation begins with the smallest acts of self-advocacy, a doctor's appointment scheduled, a conversation recorded, a pattern documented. And sometimes those small acts change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.